It was a dry Tuesday morning in the Arizona desert, and the air inside United States Penitentiary Florence Max felt heavier than usual. Warden Leonard Briggs sat at his desk, reading the request again, the paper slightly crumpled from how tightly he'd been holding it. He'd seen all kinds of things during his 27 years in the Federal Bureau of Prisons: riots, escape attempts, redemption stories that never quite made it, but nothing like this. The letter was short, written in neat, deliberate cursive on a lined sheet from the inmate stationery. It read, "Warden Briggs, if permitted, I would like to see the K9 who tracked and caught me. No press, no tricks. Just one last time. Respectfully, Travis Carver." Travis Red Carver. The name still rang like a siren in federal law enforcement circles. Bank robber, fugitive. 4 years ago, his capture had been national news. Now, at 52, he was just another inmate serving life without parole, fading into the monotony of cement, steel, and silence. But this was different. Briggs leaned back in his chair, staring at the letter, as if it might explain itself. Why would a man like Carver want to see the dog that ended his freedom? Before we unravel this unbelievable encounter, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories that'll keep you thinking long after they're told. The prison administration office was quiet, except for the hum of the overhead fluorescent lights. Briggs's secretary, Marlene, knocked lightly before stepping in. "You still looking at that letter?" she asked, setting a file on his desk. "Yeah," he muttered. "I can't get a read on it." "Well, maybe it's spiritual," she said, half joking. "Some people find God in here." "Maybe he found a dog." Briggs didn't laugh. "Or maybe it's a setup, a stunt. He never talked to anyone before. Why now?" Marlene hesitated. "Want me to look into any legal precedent for this kind of thing?" He nodded. "And see if Officer Dana Ruiz is still active, the one partnered with Ranger." "That dog's retired," she said. "I think he got some national medal after the capture." "Ruiz?" "She's still in Arizona. Haven't heard much about her since." Briggs stood walking to the window. From this angle he could see the exercise yard below, men pacing, some shouting, others just staring at the fence. This place didn't allow for much change. That's what made Carver's request so strange. It suggested evolution. And in a place like this, evolution was rare. He thought back to the day Carver was brought in. Bruised, silent, eyes like ice. Even then there was no arrogance, just a watchfulness, like a man studying the people who finally caged him. Since then, Carver had been a model inmate, quiet, obedient, but detached. He refused all media, denied interview requests, and stayed away from the prison chapel and social programs. He didn't talk to other inmates. He didn't write to family. Now, out of nowhere, this. Briggs picked up the phone and dialed internal security. "Get me Carver. I want to talk to him, alone." Down in the secure block, Carver sat on his bunk, hands folded. He looked thinner than his intake photos, older too, the red in his beard gone grey. When the guard told him the warden wanted a word, he just nodded. Back in Briggs' office, Carver entered with a slow, deliberate pace. He didn't sit until the warden motioned. No cuffs, no chains. Briggs believed in reading people through their eyes. "You really want to see that dog?" Briggs asked. Carver looked up, calm. "Yes, sir." "Why?" Carver paused. His voice, when it came, was low and even. "Because that dog was the first thing in a long time that didn't lie to me." Briggs said nothing. He just stared at the man across from him, wondering if this was the beginning of a story he never expected to hear. Travis Red Carver was born on a sweltering July evening in 1973, in a rust-colored trailer parked just outside Elk City, Oklahoma. His mother, a waitress with brittle nerves, raised him alone after his father disappeared sometime around his 3rd birthday. There was no search, no missing person report, just absence, thick and permanent, like the Oklahoma mud after a storm. By the time Travis turned 9, he was already skipping school, running errands for older boys who paid him in pocket knives and cigarettes. He wasn't dumb. On the contrary, his teachers said he was one of the sharpest readers in the class, but the rules of the classroom held less weight than the rules of the street. His first arrest came at 12, shoplifting from a corner store in Clinton. The officer who brought him in didn't cuff him, just looked at the boy and said, "You're not stupid, son, so why act like it?" Travis didn't answer. He didn't have to. The system marked him that day, and he marked it back in kind. By 17, he'd left school for good. He drifted between oil rig jobs and small-time hustles, doing just enough to get by and never enough to get caught. But somewhere in his early 20s, a switch flipped. Maybe it was the death of his uncle, his only consistent male figure. Maybe it was the years of barely scraping by. Whatever it was, Travis began taking risks. He started with break-ins, closed gas stations, storage units, places without alarms. He never carried a weapon, never hurt anyone, and always moved fast. The money wasn't much, but the rush made him feel visible, alive. By 30, his crimes had escalated to full-blown bank jobs. Small-town branches, mostly. The kind with no security guard and a teller who knew every customer by name. He wore masks, used stolen vehicles, and had the timing down to under 4 minutes. Law enforcement began to piece together a pattern, but Travis stayed one step ahead, changing his methods, crossing state lines, moving like wind. It wasn't about greed. He lived modestly, kept off the radar, even helped a few struggling strangers along the way. Some thought he fancied himself a modern outlaw, a Robin Hood type. But Travis never tried to explain himself. He just kept moving. Then came the job in Lubbock, Texas. Something went wrong. A teller hit a silent alarm. Police arrived quicker than expected. Travis escaped through an alley and disappeared for a year and a half. 18 months of nothing. No sightings, no fingerprints, no footprints. The FBI launched a task force. He became a ghost. What few knew was that Travis had retreated deep into the backcountry of Arizona and New Mexico, using knowledge from his teenage days, camping with his uncle. He lived in abandoned sheds, moved only at night, paid cash, and left no trace. It was as if the world had simply forgotten him, but even ghosts get tired. Somewhere during that time, Travis stopped robbing. He started drawing, sketching trees, dogs, faces he remembered from diners. Something softened, though he never admitted it. The tension didn't leave, but it dulled. Still, he knew it couldn't last forever. A misstep was inevitable, and it came in the form of an overheard phone call in Gallup, New Mexico. A truck stop. A kid with a cell phone mentioned a strange man who paid cash and asked too many questions. One tip became two, then a pattern emerged. Within weeks, agencies from 3 states began triangulating his movements. Travis knew he was being hunted. He knew the net was closing, but he didn't run like before. He moved slower, more deliberate, as if he were waiting for something, though he wouldn't have been able to name it. In the end, it wasn't a badge or bullet that brought him down. It was a dog. But that part of the story wasn't here yet. For now, Travis sat in the heart of the desert, a man with no more ground to cover, and perhaps, just perhaps, a flicker of something else forming beneath the dust and memory. Dana Ruiz had never planned to work with dogs, at least not professionally. Growing up in El Paso, her world was shaped by grit, structure, and the quiet strength of her mother, who raised 3 daughters while managing a grocery store. Dana joined the Marines at 19, chasing something she couldn't quite name, maybe purpose, maybe escape. She served 2 tours in Iraq. On her second deployment, she was caught in a convoy ambush outside Fallujah. The memory came back in flashes, smoke screaming, metal tearing. She was pinned under debris, bleeding and barely conscious, when a K9 unit passed through the area. A Belgian Malinois named Duke found her. He stayed by her side until medics arrived. She never forgot his eyes, sharp, focused and calm, even in chaos. After her discharge, the transition to civilian life was rough. She dealt with nightmares, sudden anger, and long silences she couldn't explain. Her daughter Sophia was only 4 then. Dana didn't know how to talk about war, so she tried to outrun it instead. She joined law enforcement in Tucson and found herself drawn toward the K9 unit. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was something deeper. Her first partner was a pup named Ranger, 18 months old, all energy and muscle. Belgian Malinois, just like Duke. The trainers warned her he'd be difficult, too alert, too aggressive, too smart for his own good. Dana took him anyway. Their bond didn't form instantly. The first weeks were a blur of nipped sleeves, failed drills, and long stares. But something changed the day she broke protocol during a chase and got cornered in a fenced alley. Ranger didn't wait for orders. He leapt the fence, sank his teeth into the suspect's arm, and held until backup arrived. From that day forward, Dana and Ranger were inseparable. They trained relentlessly: urban scent tracking, narcotics detection, suspect apprehension. Ranger learned fast, thrived under pressure, and displayed an uncanny ability to read Dana's body language. He responded to her voice before commands were even spoken. He trusted her. And Dana, for the first time in years, trusted someone again. Their first major bust together came during a weapons trafficking case in Phoenix. Ranger located a hidden cache behind a false wall, preventing a possible gang shootout. They made headlines in local law enforcement circles. Not long after the FBI called, they needed elite K-9 teams for an escalating fugitive case, one with a man who had already evaded capture across 4 states. Dana didn't ask questions. She packed Ranger's gear, kissed Sophia goodbye, and left with a duffel bag and a sidearm. Ranger rode in the back of the SUV, eyes scanning every highway mile as if he already knew the gravity of what was coming. In briefing rooms across Texas and New Mexico, Dana listened to case files on Travis Carver, his patterns, known hideouts, personality profile. He was meticulous, fast, and absolutely unpredictable. Several K-9 teams had already rotated through the task force. None had found him. But Dana had a gut feeling, and Ranger had that look in his eyes again, the same one he had before every major case, focused, unshakable. One night, while resting at a field station near Alamogordo, another officer asked her, "How does he do it? Your dog." "He's not like the others." Dana looked at Ranger, curled beside her boots, ears twitching in half-sleep. "He doesn't track scent," she said quietly. "He tracks fear, and Carver's got plenty of it." That answer stayed with her, and though she didn't say it out loud, Dana knew something else too. Ranger had never failed her, not once. And if the manhunt led them into the darkest corner of the desert, she believed, with every scar and fiber of her being, that Ranger would lead them back out. The desert didn't forgive mistakes. That was the first thing Dana reminded herself as their SUV crawled down a dirt road somewhere outside of Magdalena, New Mexico. The air shimmered with heat even in early morning, the horizon a blur of red rock and thorny mesquite. This wasn't just a manhunt. It was a test of endurance, patience, and precision. The FBI's command post was a makeshift setup in a shuttered high school gym, with maps taped to the walls and dry erase boards full of cryptic markings. Every circle, arrow, and sticky note pointed toward one name: Travis Carver. Agent Brendan Hale led the task force, a by-the-book operator with zero tolerance for shortcuts. He stood stiff in every meeting, tie-tight even in 103-degree heat. "We believe Carver passed through reserve last week," Hale told the assembled officers, including Dana. A farm supply store reported missing gear: boots, dried food, a water filter. No break-in signs. He's good, knows how to move. Dana watched silently, fingers lightly resting on Ranger's collar. The dog sat beside her, still as stone but alert. Local rancher also mentioned a man camping near the Gila, said he vanished before sunrise. "Could be him," Hale continued. "We tighten the net. No lone patrols, teams of 2. If you see anything, don't engage, call it in." Tension hummed beneath every order. Carver hadn't just been elusive, he'd embarrassed law enforcement at every turn. He left behind no prints, no digital trail. They were chasing a shadow, and shadows didn't bleed. After the meeting, Dana walked Ranger around the lot for air. Her partner, Officer Caleb Renshaw, lit a cigarette nearby, shielding it from the wind. "You ever chase someone this slippery?" he asked. Dana shook her head. "Not this quiet. Even the smart ones leave noise." Caleb exhaled slowly. "Feels like we're hunting a ghost." "No," Dana replied. "Ghosts don't sweat. Carver's human. He'll make a mistake." That mistake came 2 days later. In a dry arroyo 10 miles south of Detil, a cattle hand spotted a man filling canteens at a solar-powered pump. By the time deputies arrived, he was gone. but he left behind a tarp, tire tracks, and the faint imprint of a boot sole. The print was small, worn at the heel. Ranger sniffed the edge and whined. "He's close," Dana said. The terrain was brutal. Cracked clay, thorny shrubs, steep ridgelines. Ranger led them through it with surgical focus. They moved silently, radios low, weapons ready. Every sound felt amplified. Wind through the brush, the crunch of dry gravel, a distant hawk cry. For hours they tracked. A broken branch here, a smudge on a rock there. Dana felt the old rhythm settle in, heartbeat syncing with Ranger's steps, eyes sweeping for anything unnatural. But the longer they searched, the more friction emerged within the task force. Some agents complained the dog was leading them in circles. Others questioned the evidence. Hale grew colder by the hour, his faith in the operation clearly thinning. During a night strategy session, voices rose. "We need to bring in drones again," one agent argued. "This is getting us nowhere." "They already tried that," Dana cut in. "Carver hides under thermal blankets. He knows how to fool sensors." Hale's jaw tightened. "Then maybe we're wasting time on this lead." Dana stood, fire in her voice. "Ranger doesn't guess. He's locked in. If Carver's out there, we'll find him." Silence. Hale finally nodded. "You have one more sweep." After that we regroup. Back at the staging tent, Dana knelt beside Ranger, brushing dirt from his fur. "You still got him, boy." Ranger looked up, eyes steady. No doubt, no fear. And deep inside, Dana felt it too. Something was close. Closer than any of them realized. The sun had just dipped below the horizon when the radio crackled. "Possible movement near Canyon Ridge, north side." Motion sensor tripped 20 minutes ago. Dana froze, eyes narrowing. She pulled out the topographical map and traced her finger along the marked trail. "That's where the rock shelf narrows. Perfect blind spots," she muttered. Hale's voice came through next. "Ruiz, take Renshaw and Ranger. Quiet entry. Do not engage unless confirmed visual." Dana nodded, already moving. Ranger trotted at her side, body taut like a coiled spring. They loaded into a side-by-side utility vehicle and rode in silence, headlights off, guided only by moonlight and memory. Canyon Ridge was quiet. Too quiet. The dry wind hissed through crevices, like it was warning them away. Dana and Renshaw moved on foot, sweeping low under brush, weapons drawn, radios silent. At the base of the ridge, Ranger stopped. His ears twitched. He sniffed the air, then pulled gently on the lead, guiding Dana up the narrow pass. Renshaw stayed back to provide cover. Dana followed Ranger carefully, step by step. The ledge was narrow, the drop on the right steep enough to snap bones. Her breath was steady, her pulse not. She knew they were close. Then she saw it. A glint. Not metal. Not eyes, something in the dirt. A partially buried food wrapper, torn and crumpled, no more than a day old. Ranger lowered his head, sniffed, then growled, low and guttural. Dana crouched, hand on her weapon. And then she heard it. A single rock dislodged above them. She looked up just in time to see a shadow move between two boulders, quick and silent. "Got him," she whispered into her mic. North ledge, moving east. The chase was on. Carver ran like a man who'd never known rest, fast, sure-footed, barely making a sound even as he bolted across jagged stone. Dana followed, heart hammering, boots sliding on gravel. Ranger surged ahead, driven by instinct and training, every muscle burning with intent. Carver's escape route narrowed as he reached the eastern shelf, a sharp ledge that ended abruptly at a drop of nearly 40 feet. On one side, the canyon wall. On the other, empty air. He turned sharply and saw Dana closing in, weapon aimed. Behind her, Ranger growled, lips pulled back, eyes locked. Carver didn't raise his hands. He didn't speak. He just stood there, breathing hard, his back to the drop. "I won't shoot unless you force me to," Dana said, her voice firm. "But the dog won't wait." Carver's eyes flicked to Ranger, then to the canyon, then back. "No more running," he said. "I'm tired." Dana moved slowly, never lowering her weapon. "Then lie down." Hands behind your head." He didn't. Instead, he dropped to one knee, looking straight at Ranger. "You're the one who found me," he said softly. "I knew it'd be you." Ranger barked once, sharp and commanding. Dana was ready to give the order, bite or hold. One word, and everything would end. But something in Carver's posture changed. Not defiance, surrender. He placed both hands flat on the ground and lay down, face in the dirt. Ranger circled him twice, teeth bared, then sat down, silent and watchful. Dana stepped forward, cuffed Carver quickly, checking his waistband and pockets. No weapon, just a folded drawing, faint pencil lines of mountains, and a dog. "You drew this?" she asked, surprised. He didn't answer, just nodded. She called it in. "Suspect in custody. No resistance. No injuries." As the sun slipped away completely and the desert night crept in, Dana stood over the man they'd hunted for months. He wasn't a ghost anymore, just flesh, bones, and something she couldn't quite name. She looked at Ranger, who was still watching Carver like he'd solved a riddle only dogs could understand. The news broke before the sun rose. "Fugitive Travis Red Carver captured after 18 months on the run," the headlines blared. Every outlet had a different version of the story, but they all repeated the same core detail. He had been found by a K-9 unit deep in the desert near the Arizona-New Mexico border. Dana didn't read the articles. She couldn't. By the time they hit the wires, she was already back at the field base, sitting on a folding chair next to Ranger, with her hands shaking just enough to make her coffee ripple in the cup. Her body ached, her clothes were stiff with dust, and her thoughts wouldn't stop spinning. "You good?" Renshaw asked gently. She nodded once. Just tired. But it wasn't just that. Something about the arrest wouldn't settle. She'd chased dozens of suspects in her career, many more violent and unpredictable than Carver, but this one had an edge of finality, like they'd both known the outcome before it happened. And it wasn't just about closing a case, it felt heavier. Carver, meanwhile, was processed quietly, flown under armed escort to a federal holding facility. There were no cameras at the airstrip, no media allowed near the convoy. That was by design. The Bureau wanted the noise around him to die down before trial. Too many people romanticized his run, called him clever, a survivor. They didn't want a folk hero. They wanted a felon. Dana submitted her report and declined the formal press opportunity. When her captain called to commend her, she accepted it politely, then turned her phone off for 3 days. Meanwhile, Ranger received more attention than she ever had. Photos of him at the scene circulated quickly, ears up, eyes sharp, his coat glinting in the desert light. Animal news blogs called him a legend. Police departments from as far as Michigan sent messages of congratulations. One even offered to build a bronze plaque in his honor. Dana was proud, of course, but deep down a strange guilt grew, something she didn't have words for. She kept going back to that moment on the ridge, to Carver's eyes when he looked at Ranger, as if he'd seen something more than a threat. 2 weeks later, at a bureau debriefing in Flagstaff, an agent pulled her aside. "You know," he said, "Carver's been quiet, completely cooperative, no requests, no legal tricks. He just sits in his cell, sketches, and feeds the story that he was humbled by a dog." Dana frowned. "Humbled?" The agent shrugged. "That's what he told his public defender. Said the dog didn't judge him, just found him." She didn't respond. The next morning, she took Ranger for a long hike outside Tucson. As they climbed the dusty trail, Dana kept thinking about the arrest. Not the tactics, not the planning, just that moment when Carver laid down, not because he was trapped, but because he chose to stop. Later, as they reached the overlook, Dana sat on a flat rock and looked out over the valley. Ranger lay beside her, panting softly. "You did good, partner," she said. Ranger didn't move. He didn't need to. Down in the prison, Carver adjusted to life behind concrete. He didn't complain. He didn't speak out. The other inmates avoided him, sensing something different, not dangerous, but unreachable. He declined visits, refused interviews, ignored mail. The only thing he asked for was access to pencils and paper. In the weeks that followed, he filled a stack of sketchbooks, mostly landscapes, sometimes faces, sometimes dogs. One guard swore he even saw a drawing of a woman kneeling beside a Belgian Malinois on a canyon ridge, her shadow stretching toward a man lying in the dirt. But no one could confirm it. Carver never shared his drawings. He just folded them neatly, stacked them under his cot, and waited. Waited, it seemed, for something else. The first thing Travis Carver noticed about prison life wasn't the noise. It was the silence between it, that strange stillness in the seconds after lights out, before the weight of sleepless men settled into the walls like heat. Florence Max wasn't built for redemption. It was built to contain, and it did that well. Carver didn't fight his new reality. He adjusted, woke early, kept his cell neat, followed orders. He didn't speak unless spoken to, didn't trade favors, didn't seek protection. The guards called him Ghost, a nickname born not from fear, but from presence so muted it felt spectral. He walked laps in the yard every morning before breakfast, never more than 30 minutes. Some inmates tried to approach, out of curiosity mostly, but gave up when they got nothing in return. No arrogance, no stories, no bravado. Just polite nods and silence. At first, staff assumed it was a phase, that once the adrenaline of capture wore off, the real Carver would emerge. But weeks turned into months and the pattern never broke. What did shift, however, was subtle. It began with books. Carver started checking out volumes from the prison library. At first legal texts, then art history. Then, oddly, dog training manuals. He read quietly in his cell, taking notes in the margins of old scrap paper, never discussing them with anyone. The librarian, Ms. Delaney, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a sharp memory, took notice. "I sure like dogs," she remarked one day, sliding a book through the slot. Carver looked up, offered a rare half-smile. "They don't talk back. Just listen." Delaney raised a brow. "And you got a lot to say?" He didn't answer, but she noticed he returned the next day for more. Word of his behavior reached Warden Briggs, who reviewed the reports with cautious curiosity. It wasn't unusual for inmates to find hobbies, but Carver's focus was unsettlingly narrow. He didn't join the chapel group, didn't write to anyone, didn't sign up for privileges, just read, walked, and sketched. Briggs ordered a psych evaluation. Dr. Janice Eldred, the prison's clinical psychologist, met with him in her office, sterile, grey, not unlike the cells themselves. "I hear you've taken an interest in dogs," she began. Carver sat across from her, calm. "I've taken an interest in how they see the world. That's specific." He shrugged. "They don't pretend. They don't lie. They react. They remember. They forgive." Dr. Eldred leaned forward. "And what are you trying to forgive?" Silence stretched. Carver's jaw tensed. "Maybe just trying to remember something worth forgiving," he said. She made a note but didn't press. After that session, Carver requested access to the prison's animal care program, not to participate, but just to observe. Florence Max had a limited initiative, run through a partnership with a nearby rescue shelter. Inmates helped socialize dogs deemed too anxious or aggressive for adoption. Briggs was hesitant. "What's he planning?" he asked Delaney one afternoon. "I don't think he's planning anything," she replied. "I think he's changing. Men like him don't change." "Maybe not," she said, "but dogs do, and he's watching them real close." Briggs approved the request under strict supervision. Carver was allowed weekly observation through the rec hall window. No contact, no interaction. Still, he never missed a session. He watched how the dogs behaved, how they responded to kindness, to boundaries, to fear. In his cell, he began drawing them, each dog from the program detailed and precise. One drawing depicted a dog cowering in a corner. In the next, the same dog sat upright, tail wagging faintly. No captions, just progression. 4 years passed like this. Quiet, steady, unremarkable on paper, but inside something was forming, an idea maybe, or a reckoning. Because Travis Carver had finally stopped running. But he hadn't stopped looking. Warden Leonard Briggs had seen his share of odd requests, religious exceptions, last meal appeals, even a man who asked for soil from his hometown. But this one stuck with him in a way he couldn't shake. The letter sat on his desk again, same exact words. "If permitted, I would like to see the K9 who tracked and caught me. No press, no tricks. Just one last time. He reread it while nursing his second cup of bitter coffee. Outside, the wind swept sand across the empty yard, carving slow patterns in the dust. This place aged people in invisible ways. Briggs had managed to keep his body in shape, but inside, the weight was harder to resist. He stared out the window, chewing the inside of his cheek. The question wasn't whether he could approve the request. It was whether he should. Protocol didn't cover something like this. The Bureau's guidelines were clear on security and visitor rights, but not on soul-searching. He could deny the request outright, and no one would blink. But the man who'd sent it wasn't who he used to be, and that's what made Briggs pause. He buzzed Marlene. "Get me the legal department. I want to know what kind of liability comes with allowing a retired K9 and civilian handler into a federal facility. Visitor-level clearance only." There was a long silence on the line before Marlene replied. "So? You're actually considering this?" "I'm considering understanding it," he said flatly. "That's not the same." The legal team responded within the hour. There were ways to structure it. Closed-room visit, on-site handlers, security present. Dinah Ruiz would need to sign waivers. The dog, Ranger, would need vet clearance. Every detail would need logging, approval, containment. Briggs sighed. He walked the hallway toward the admin wing, nodding at officers along the way. On the wall, a faded photo from 10 years ago showed the prison's now-defunct rehabilitation program. A younger Briggs shaking hands with a man who later overdosed on heroin 2 months after parole. The failure stung, even after all these years. When he reached the staff conference room, the ethics committee was already seated, 3 of them: internal affairs, mental health, legal. He laid out the request, read the letter aloud. No one spoke for a moment. Finally, the legal rep, Raymond, adjusted his glasses. "There's no precedent for this that wouldn't make headlines if it leaks. That's your biggest risk." The psychologist, Dr. Eldred, cleared her throat. "I've spoken with Carver. He's emotionally stable, not manipulative." "I believe the request is sincere," Raymond scoffed lightly. "Sincerity doesn't guarantee safety." "No," Eldred said, "but neither does ignoring the human condition." Briggs leaned forward. "I'm not asking for sentiment. I want to know if granting this damages the integrity of this institution or enhances it." They debated for another 20 minutes. The arguments were careful, clinical. Eventually, they landed where Briggs expected. If the risk could be mitigated and no precedent set, it was his call. That night, he went home later than usual. His dog, a retired bomb-sniffing Labrador named Chester, greeted him at the door, tail thumping softly against the tile. Briggs knelt beside him, scratched behind his ears. "You ever think a man could change?" he asked aloud. Chester yawned. Briggs sat on the couch holding the letter again. 4 years. No infractions, no manipulation, no drama, just that request. The next morning, he called Dinah Ruiz. "Warden Briggs here," he began. "You're not going to believe what I'm about to ask." There was a long silence. Then Dinah replied, her voice cautious. "Try me." Briggs hesitated, then said, "Carver wants to see Ranger." "Just once, just the dog." Dinah didn't respond immediately. He could hear her breathing. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "But I'm not sure I want to look that man in the eye again." Briggs nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "I understand," he said, "so take your time. But I need to know. If you do say yes, will the dog be ready?" A pause. Then, "Ranger's always ready." "I'm the one who might not be." Dana stared at her phone long after the call with Warden Briggs ended. The kitchen was quiet, except for the slow ticking of the wall clock and the faint hum of the fridge. Outside, the Tucson afternoon sweltered, sun pressing down through the blinds like a judgment. She looked over at Ranger. He was sprawled across the tile, eyes half closed, aging more in posture than in spirit. His hearing wasn't as sharp these days, and he no longer chased shadows like he used to, but the moment her voice changed, he lifted his head, waiting. "You remember him, don't you?" she said softly. Ranger blinked. then rested his head back down. Dana poured herself a glass of water, but didn't drink it. Her hand trembled slightly as she set it on the counter. She hadn't thought about Travis Carver in a long time. Not the way she did now. The case was a chapter she'd closed, filed and locked, or so she thought. But the truth was, something about that night on the ridge had always stayed with her. The way Carver didn't resist, the way he looked at Ranger, not with fear, but almost reverence. It had unsettled her. She told herself it was nothing, just adrenaline, closure, the end of a pursuit. Now he wanted to see the dog again. Not her, just the dog. And yet, the request hit her harder than she could explain. That evening, Dana took Ranger for a slow walk around the block. He moved a little stiffer than before, but still steady. Neighbors waved. A kid on a scooter called out, "Hi, Ranger," and the old dog gave a single wag. Back home, Dana sat on the porch and watched the sky bleed into soft purples. Her daughter, Sophia, now 14, came outside with 2 iced teas. "You okay, Mom?" she asked, handing over the glass. Dana took it, grateful. "Yeah, just thinking." "About work?" "About someone we used to chase." Sophia sat beside her. "Is it the guy Ranger caught?" Dana nodded. "He asked to see Ranger after all these years." "That's weird." Dana smiled faintly. "Yeah, it is." "Are you going to let him?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me doesn't want to open that door. It took a long time to close it." "But you didn't close it," Sophia said, eyes thoughtful. "You just stopped talking about it." The words hit harder than Dana expected. She looked at her daughter, suddenly aware of how much she'd hidden behind silence. Later that week, she visited a veteran support group she hadn't been to in over a year. Familiar faces, familiar chairs, same circle of wounded resilience. When it was her turn, she hesitated before speaking. "A man I arrested years ago. He asked to see the canine who caught him. Just the dog, not me." A woman across from her, a former army medic named Lena, tilted her head. "Why do you think it bothers you?" "Because I'm not sure what he wants," Dana said. "And because I'm not sure I want to know." "Or maybe you're afraid he changed," someone else offered. "And you haven't." The words lingered in the air. That night, Dana sat beside Ranger on the living room rug, flipping through an old binder filled with photos from their active duty days, raids, training exercises, candid shots where she looked tired but whole. There was one photo, Ranger alert, eyes focused, nose in the wind. Behind him, barely in frame, Carver's silhouette disappearing into trees. She traced the image with her finger. The next morning, she called Briggs. "I'll do it," she said. "You sure?" "No," she admitted, "but I'm ready to find out." The desert sun was low and golden by the time Dana pulled up to the Florence Max entrance. The prison loomed ahead, concrete, wire, and silence. And Ranger sat in the back seat, calm but alert, his ears perked as if he sensed the tension hanging between the moment and what it meant. At the gate, a uniformed officer checked her ID, then looked at the crate beside her. "This him?" the officer asked. Dana nodded. "Ranger," the officer smiled faintly. "I've heard the stories." Inside, protocols took over, papers signed, ID tags issued. Vests offered, declined. Ranger was leashed and led through a secondary entrance under armed supervision, though no one believed the dog was a threat, not to anyone but the past. Warden Briggs met her in the corridor outside the visitation wing. "Thank you for doing this," he said, voice lower than usual. Dana didn't respond at first. She adjusted Ranger's harness. "I'm not doing this for him," she said. "I didn't think you were." They led her to a secured room, stark and windowless. One table, 3 chairs, one reinforced wall with a 2-way mirror. Surveillance was live, but discreet. Guards waited outside, out of view, but close enough to act if needed. Carver was already there, seated, hands on the table. He wore the standard khaki prison uniform. No shackles, no expression. He didn't look up when the door opened. Dana stepped in with Ranger at her side. For a long second, no one moved. Then, as if pulled by an invisible tether, Ranger walked forward, slowly, deliberately, and sat just across from Carver, tail still, eyes fixed. Carver raised his head. His gaze didn't search for Dana. It landed directly on Ranger. "I wasn't sure he'd come," he said, voice rough from disuse. Dana remained standing, arms crossed. "He's not here for closure," she replied. "He's here because I brought him. That's it." Carver nodded. "Fair." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on knees, and studied Ranger like he was reading a scripture. There was no smile, no performative grief, just stillness. "I thought about this moment for a long time," he said. "Didn't think I'd get it." Dana said nothing. "I remember the sound of his paws on that rock. I remember the growl, the way he didn't hesitate. Most men do. But he didn't." Ranger gave a soft, barely audible whine. Carver lowered his voice. "He didn't hate me. He just found me." That's all he was ever meant to do. Dana moved to the far wall and leaned back, still watching, measuring every word, every breath. Her muscles were tight. She didn't trust Carver, not with his voice, not with his stillness, not with her own emotions. "He saved lives that day," she said, "yours included." "I know," Carver replied. He reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "They cleared me to give this to you. No metal, no risk." He placed it on the table and slid it forward. Dana didn't move. "It's a sketch," he said quietly. "Not of me, of him. Just how I remember him." Dana stepped forward cautiously and took the paper. She opened it slowly. The drawing was raw, graphite lines full of weight. Ranger, mid-step on the ridge, his eyes burning into the page. The detail was striking, almost too personal. She folded it and placed it in her pocket. Carver looked up at her now. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to see him. I needed to remind myself that something real stopped me. Not bars, not threats. Just a dog." Ranger stood, took 2 steps forward, and sat again at Carver's feet. Not close enough to touch, just near enough to be seen. Then he turned his head back to Dana. She nodded once. "That's enough," she said. Carver didn't argue. He lowered his head, whispering, "Thank you." Not to her, but to the dog. And for the first time in years, Dana wasn't sure who needed the moment more. For a long moment the room was still. The air was thick with the kind of silence that pressed down on everyone inside. Carver leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, his eyes never leaving Ranger. Dana stood at the edge of the room, arms crossed, jaw tight. She didn't trust whatever game he thought he was playing. But then Carver spoke again, his voice softer than before, almost steady, but carrying something fragile beneath it. "I owe you something," he said, looking at Ranger. "And it isn't an apology for getting caught. It's an apology for what I became before he found me." Dana frowned. "You think words change anything?" Carver turned to her, calm. "No. Words are cheap. I know that. But when you've spent years in a box, the right ones matter more than anything else. You start talking less, thinking more." Ranger tilted his head slightly as if listening. Carver's lips curved faintly, not in a smile but in recognition. "When he stopped me on that ridge," Carver said, "it wasn't just the end of my run. It was the first time in years I felt seen, not hunted, not hated. Just," he searched for the word, "understood." Dana's arms tightened across her chest. "A dog understood you?" "Yes," Carver replied, "because dogs don't lie. They don't play games. He didn't look at me like a story or a failure. He just looked. And I realized then, maybe it was time to stop running." Dana wanted to scoff, to call it manipulation, but the weight in his tone unsettled her. He wasn't pleading. He wasn't charming. He was confessing. Carver lowered his gaze to the table. His fingers tapped once, twice, before he continued. "I hurt people," he said, "not with guns, not with fists, but with fear. I walked into places where folks were just doing their jobs, and I left them remembering me for the wrong reasons. They still think about those moments when they locked their doors at night. I can't take that back, but I can face it. I need to face it." Dana exhaled slowly, her throat tight. She wasn't expecting this. Not here. Not now. Carver's eyes lifted again, sharp but stripped of defiance. I didn't ask to see him for closure. I asked because I wanted to tell the truth at least once, without a deal, without leverage. Just the truth. What truth? Dana asked, her voice firmer than she felt. That he saved me, Carver said simply. Not from prison, from myself. If I'd kept running, I would have ended in a hole somewhere, another forgotten body in the desert. But he stopped me. And because of that, I've had 4 years to think, to draw, to remember who I was before I became nothing but headlines. The room went silent again. Dana looked at Ranger. The dog hadn't moved, eyes still fixed on Carver. Carver leaned back now, shoulders sagging as if a weight had finally slid off. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I needed to say it out loud where it mattered, to him, to the only one who never lied about who I was. Dana's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to dismiss his words as strategy, but the steadiness in his eyes didn't match the schemes of a con. It looked more like something she hadn't seen in years, surrender. Ranger gave a low chuff, almost like an acknowledgement. Dana felt her chest constrict at the sound. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to hold her ground. Say what you came to say, Carver, but don't mistake it for absolution. Carver nodded once. Fair enough. Then let me finish with this. I don't want freedom. I just wanted the chance to thank the one who ended mine. The weight of those words lingered, heavy and undeniable. And for the first time, Dana didn't know what to do with them. Behind the two-way glass, Warden Briggs stood with his arms folded, eyes fixed on the room. He had watched hundreds of inmate meetings over his career, most of them transactional. Lawyers negotiating, families crying, tempers flaring. But this was different. The air in that room felt charged, as if something unspoken had shifted the very walls. When Carver uttered the words, I just wanted the chance to thank the one who ended mine, Briggs felt something crack inside him. It wasn't sympathy. It wasn't weakness. It was recognition. Marlene, standing beside him, leaned closer. You believe him? Briggs didn't answer immediately. His jaw worked, his eyes never leaving Carver. Finally he said, I don't know if belief is the point. Marlene frowned. Then what is? Briggs sighed, rubbing his temples. It's the fact that he wanted to say it at all. Men like Carver don't give thanks. They take, they twist, they deflect, but that... He nodded toward the room. So that was something else. He remembered a night almost 15 years earlier, when his own daughter had been taken into county custody for possession. Meth. He had bailed her out, furious, terrified, humiliated. At the time he blamed her weakness. It took years and her eventual recovery for him to understand that shame had almost killed her more than the drug ever did. What pulled her back wasn't punishment. It was the day she was allowed to volunteer at a rescue shelter, hands buried in the fur of broken dogs that still found ways to trust again. That memory haunted him now as he watched Ranger's steady gaze on Carver. Later that evening, back in his office, Briggs sat in the half-light of a lamp, the letter still on his desk. He picked up a pen and began to jot down notes, not for a report, not for the Bureau, but for himself. Some men break the rules to escape. Some break them to find themselves again. And sometimes what changes them isn't steel or concrete, but something simple, something alive. A dog can carry more truth in his eyes than all our laws combined. He stopped writing, staring at the words. He wasn't a sentimental man, but the thought pressed heavy on him. The next morning, Briggs called Dr. Eldred into his office. You saw the session, he said. What do you make of it? The psychologist sat carefully, folding her hands. I think it was genuine. Carver wasn't performing, he was processing, and Ranger was the anchor that made it possible. Briggs tapped his desk. Do you think this can be repeated? Not with Carver. That was unique, but with others? Possibly, if they had the right structure. Briggs leaned back, his mind churning. You mean a program? Dr. Eldred nodded slowly. Animal-assisted therapy has been studied in correctional settings. It lowers aggression, builds empathy, reduces recidivism. We could partner with shelters again. Controlled. Limited. But it could work. Briggs thought about it all day. By evening he walked through the lower corridors, where the hum of prison life was strongest, guards calling out, steel doors clanging shut, men pacing like caged storms. He stopped by the rec hall window, where the shelter dogs were brought in once a month for the handful of inmates who had earned contact privileges. A German shepherd pup barked playfully, tail whipping the air. The inmate handling him, tattoos crawling up his neck, laughed, a sound so raw it startled even the guards. Briggs stood there, listening. He realized then that this was the answer to the question he'd carried since his daughter's spiral. What can reach a man who's unreachable? Not threats, not walls, not fear. But a creature that didn't care about what he'd done yesterday, only about how he treated it today. Briggs straightened, decision settling in his chest like stone. He would expand the program. He would fight the Bureau if he had to. Because if a man like Carver could find clarity in the eyes of a dog, maybe there was hope for others too. And maybe, just maybe, for himself. Ranger's muzzle had gone grey by the time the Bureau called to formally retire him. Dana had known the day was coming, but the weight of it still pressed on her chest. For years, he had been her shield, her compass, her partner in every sense of the word. Letting him step out of duty felt like letting go of part of herself. The ceremony was simple, held in a training yard outside Tucson. Officers clapped, speeches were made. A polished plaque with his name etched into brass was handed to Dana. Ranger, as if aware of the attention, stood tall, ears perked, eyes sharp. But when it was over, he lay at her feet, head resting across her boots as if to say, "We've done enough." That night, Dana sat on her porch with him at her side. The desert was quiet except for the buzz of cicadas. She stroked the fur around his neck, rough and warm. "You've earned the rest," she whispered, "but I'm not sure what I'll do without you." Ranger gave a soft huff and closed his eyes. Meanwhile, in Florence Max, Carver was sketching again. Word had spread among the guards that the warden was considering an expansion of the dog program. It wasn't public, but rumors had a way of slipping through cracks in walls. Carver requested more pencils. His drawings shifted, less landscapes now, more images of dogs in motion. A retriever fetching, a shepherd resting, a mutt pressed against an inmate's leg. One evening, he slid a folded page to a guard he trusted. "For the warden," he said. The guard delivered it. Briggs unfolded the sketch later that night and stared at it for a long time. It showed a leash hanging loose, not broken, but resting between two hands, one tattooed, the other small and childlike. Around that same time, a letter arrived at Dana's house. It was from the warden. "Your dog began something we can't ignore. We're launching a pilot program to train abandoned dogs with inmates who qualify. It's optional, voluntary, and it's going to need mentors. Ranger's name will be attached to it. I thought you should know." Dana read it twice, her throat tightening. She looked at Ranger, who was dozing peacefully by the couch, and felt a mix of pride and ache. Weeks later, she visited the prison, not for Carver, not for closure, but for the program's first session. In a fenced yard, 5 inmates sat with nervous rescue dogs, learning the basics of patience. Some of the men looked rough, broken down by years of violence and regret. But when the dogs pawed at their hands or wagged uncertain tails, the hardness cracked. For a moment, they weren't inmates. They were just men with dogs. Briggs met her at the gate. "We're calling it the Ranger program," he said. "Thought it was fitting." Dana swallowed. He'd like that. Back inside, Carver heard about the launch. For once, he asked for writing paper, not to sketch, but to draft something larger. He began outlining chapters, half memoir, half reflection, about running, about capture, about the day a dog ended his path and gave him another. It wasn't for publication, at least not yet. It was for himself, proof that a man who had spent his life escaping could finally sit still long enough to write. In the months that followed, Ranger became more than a name. He became a symbol. The program grew. More dogs, more inmates, more stories of hardened men softening when a pair of eyes looked at them without judgment. For Dana, it was bittersweet. Ranger was slowing down, his joints stiff, his naps longer. But everywhere she looked, His spirit was multiplying. Not just in the program, in the men it touched, in the choices they made afterward. Legacy wasn't about medals or ceremonies. It was about what carried on when you stopped moving. And Ranger, even in rest, was still leading the way. The Ranger program didn't start with fanfare. There were no cameras, no ribbon cuttings, no glossy brochures. It began in silence, in a fenced yard behind the rec hall with 5 dogs and 5 men who didn't know how to hold a leash without gripping it like a weapon. The first sessions were awkward. The dogs barked, pulled, or cowered. The men cursed, fumbled, and hid their nerves under hardened faces. But slowly something shifted. A shepherd mix that once snapped at every touch learned to sit calmly. A pit bull that trembled in corners began leaning into the leg of an inmate known for his fists. Small victories, but they mattered. Briggs watched from a distance, hands behind his back. He didn't smile often, but when he saw a lifer, someone who hadn't spoken a kind word in years, whisper "good boy" to a trembling mutt, the corners of his mouth twitched. One of the inmates, a man named Cortez, had been written off long ago. Violence had followed him into prison and no program had ever stuck. But with a wiry terrier named Buddy, he was different. He sat for hours, brushing the dog, whispering in Spanish under his breath. Care guard once overheard him saying, "You're the only thing in my life that doesn't look at me like a monster." Stories like his spread quietly through the blocks. Men who never volunteered for anything began asking about the program, not for early release, not for privileges, but for the chance to touch something that didn't recoil from them. Meanwhile, Dana returned every few weeks, sometimes to mentor, sometimes just to watch. Ranger came with her when his health allowed. Even in retirement, his presence commanded attention. The inmate stood a little straighter when he entered the yard, and the dogs seemed calmer when he sat nearby, as if they recognized the authority of a legend. Dana spoke to the men when asked, never preaching, just sharing. One afternoon, Cortez approached her after a session. "Officer Ruiz," he began, hesitant. "The dog, he makes me remember I was a kid once, before all this." Dana studied him carefully. "Hold on to that," she said. "Dogs don't care about what you were yesterday, only about who you are with them right now." Cortez nodded, eyes lowering. That's the hardest part. Back in his cell, Carver heard pieces of these stories. Though he wasn't part of the program, inmates spoke of it in passing. Buddy calming Cortez, a mutt helping a man sleep without nightmares for the first time in years. Carver listened quietly, sketching by the dim light of his lamp. His drawings shifted again, less solitary, more communal. A row of dogs sitting beside a row of men, not chained but tethered together by something unseen. Warden Briggs kept those sketches in a drawer, collected through guards who received them quietly. He never asked Carver to explain. He didn't need to. The images said enough. Outside the walls, word began to leak. A local shelter posted a photo of one of the rehabilitated dogs, once labeled unadoptable, now resting in the arms of a smiling family. The caption mentioned the Ranger program. Soon, letters began arriving at the prison, handwritten notes from strangers thanking the inmates for giving those dogs another chance. Briggs read some of them aloud during a session. Tough men sat with leashes in their hands, blinking quickly, pretending dust had blown into their eyes. The quiet impact grew. No one claimed miracles. Fights still broke out. Inmates still carried the weight of their pasts. But in the spaces between violence, there were new sounds. A whistle, a command, a laugh that hadn't been heard in years. And through it all, Ranger's name lived on, not as a symbol of capture, but as a bridge, a reminder that even in the hardest places, something soft could still take root. Ranger's paws moved slower now, each step deliberate, but his eyes still carried the same fire. Dana walked beside him through the sterile corridor of Florence Max one final time. She knew this visit was different. Ranger was nearing the end of his journey, and Carver had asked for one last meeting before the dog's retirement became permanent. The guards opened the visitation door. Carver was already seated, older, thinner, but his posture was calm. When Ranger entered, something in his face softened instantly. He leaned forward, elbows resting on the table, and whispered, "There he is." Dana stayed silent, hand resting lightly on Ranger's harness. She watched. Carver lowered his gaze to the floor, then back to the dog. His voice cracked, not from weakness, but from something heavier. "I lost my freedom, but that dog gave me back my soul." The words hung in the room, weighty and final. Dana felt her throat tighten. She had prepared for anger, for regret, for rehearsed lines meant to manipulate. But not this. Ranger, as if understanding, pressed down into a sit, his head tilting slightly, calm and steady. Carver exhaled, long and weary. "I don't expect another chance at life. I know where I'll end. But if men in here are holding leashes instead of knives because of him, then maybe that's enough. Maybe that's more than I ever gave back." For the first time, Dana met his eyes. She didn't forgive him, not fully, but she saw something she hadn't before. Not the fugitive, not the headline, not the man who ran for 18 months. She saw a man who had stopped running. She gave Ranger a soft pat. "Time to go, partner." Carver didn't reach out, didn't move closer. He simply nodded once, a quiet farewell. As Ranger stood and turned, Carver whispered again, almost to himself, "Thank you." Back in the corridor, Dana walked slowly, her chest heavy but strangely lighter. She knew this was the last time Ranger would set foot in the prison, and it felt right. The circle had closed. Weeks later, Warden Briggs signed a final report on the visit. He titled it, "The Day a Dog Changed a Man." It wasn't a bureaucratic label. It was truth. The Ranger program continued to grow. More shelters partnered. More dogs found homes. More inmates discovered, in the eyes of those animals, a chance to be seen without judgment. Briggs often walked the yard during sessions, listening to the laughter and commands. Every time he did, he thought of Carver's words and his daughter's recovery, and he felt something rare in his line of work: hope. Dana retired Ranger officially at home, giving him the comfort he had earned. Sophia, now a teenager, built a small wooden box engraved with his name. They placed his commendations inside, not for glory but for memory. Ranger spent his last months basking in sunlight, his head on Dana's lap, a quiet sentinel who had given everything and asked for nothing. When the day came and Ranger was gone, Dana buried him beneath a mesquite tree on their property. She didn't speak much, just whispered, "You saved more lives than you'll ever know." Sophia held her mother's hand, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Life moved forward, but Ranger's presence lingered everywhere. In the prison, in the men who now held leashes instead of fists, in the sketches Carver left behind, in the quiet strength Dana carried into each new day. And for those who knew the story, Ranger was never just a dog. He was the line between who a man was and who he might become. If this story moved you, subscribe now, and don't miss the next one. And if you want to hear about another unlikely hero who changed everything, click the video on your screen right now.